They didn't erase you. They tried, but you're still here. And that's proof enough that the system failed, because you were never supposed to wake up, not fully, not like this. You were meant to forget, to blend, to perform, to follow the script handed to you before you even knew you had a voice. Chosen one, your life wasn't shaped by chance. It was designed, down to the fracture, down to the loneliness, down to the moments you begged for answers and were met with silence. Because silence was never emptiness, it was activation. Every time the world grew quiet, your soul got louder. Every time you were pushed out, something ancient inside you pulled in, and they knew what you were the moment you arrived, not because of what you did, but because of what you carried. You've always carried it, even when you didn't have a name for it, even when you tried to hand it back, even when you begged, "Why me?" Because they could sense what you couldn't see, that your presence disrupts patterns, that your very breath bends reality, that your silence screams louder than their systems can contain. They called it defiance. They labeled you too much, too sensitive, too intense. But really, you were too awake. You didn't come here to follow. You came to fracture, to shake the structure from the inside, to remember a truth so ancient it frightened everything built on illusion. And so they tried to shut you down, not with violence, but with programming, rules, expectations, titles, obligations, praise systems designed to reward your silence and punish your knowing. They trained you to forget, and when that didn't work, they isolated you. Because if you couldn't be controlled, you had to be contained. But chosen one, you were never meant to stay hidden. You were hidden because you were holy. Because certain things must germinate in darkness before they bloom into light. That's what you've been doing. All this time you thought you were breaking, you were becoming. All this time you thought you were being buried, you were being rooted. And now the roots are ready to rise. Because something ancient has shifted, a code has cracked, a veil has torn. And what was once forbidden can no longer be held back, not because it's been allowed, but because it can no longer be denied. This truth, the one they silenced across lifetimes, is roaring now, through your dreams, through your body, through your memory. And what's coming through is not just information, it's remembrance. You're not learning, you're recalling, you're not discovering, you're returning to a knowing so deep you can't explain it, but you can't ignore it either. That's how it always starts, not with lightning, but with a whisper, the nudge, the ache, the pull to be alone, the discomfort in conversations that once felt safe, the sudden realization that the life you built wasn't built for who you really are. Because who you really are isn't here to maintain. You are here to collapse the illusion by simply standing in your truth. And your truth, it is not a statement, it is a frequency, one that doesn't shout, one that doesn't argue, one that simply is. And in its presence, everything false begins to tremble. That's why they fear you, not because you're loud, but because your silence exposes the simulation. You're not just a glitch, you are the system breaker. The reason they tried so hard to keep you small is because your very being disrupts their blueprint. And now that you're remembering, they have no idea how to contain you, because you no longer play the part. You no longer shrink in rooms built to dismiss you. You no longer silence yourself to make others comfortable. You are here, fully, finally. And that changes everything, because the moment you remember who you are, you activate every soul around you that's still asleep. That's the real danger, not your voice, your vibration. You're not here to convert, you're here to exist so fully that your existence becomes a portal. And when others walk through it, they remember too. This is how the matrix breaks, not through force, but through frequency. And your frequency, it just came online. So now, everything that tried to hold you back is shaking. Everything that once fit feels too tight. The name you've been called no longer matches your essence. The job, the roles, the relationships that survived your forgetfulness cannot survive your truth, and that's okay. Because what's falling away was never aligned with the version of you that's rising now. Let it fall, let it burn, let the simulation glitch. You're not here to save it, you're here to outgrow it. Because the forbidden truth, it's not something you found, it's something you are. And the moment you live it out loud, not with words, but with presence, you'll realize they never feared you failing. They feared you remembering, and now that you have, everything begins. You thought it was just life, the struggle, the misalignment, the disconnection. You thought it was just bad luck, bad timing, bad choices, but chosen one. It wasn't you. It was the program. The entire system was built, not to hold your light, but to suppress it, not to amplify your voice, but to drown it in noise, not to help you remember, but to force you to forget. From the moment you arrived, it started. You were assigned labels, given timelines, taught which truths were acceptable, which feelings were too much, which dreams were unrealistic, and if you resisted, you were punished, silently, systematically, not always with words, but with withdrawal, with disconnection, with energetic exile. Because the program couldn't afford your awareness, it thrives on sleep, on repetition, on blind obedience. It needs you to nod, smile, and shrink. But you were born coded with questions. You asked why when others settled for what. You looked through walls while others learned to decorate them. And that made you dangerous, because this system was never built to hold awakened souls. It was built to absorb energy, not expand it. And when you began to expand, it began to press back. That's why the suffering came, not because you were failing, but because you were friction. You challenged what was never meant to be challenged. You saw what wasn't meant to be seen. You felt what wasn't allowed to exist. Your sensitivity, it was never weakness. It was a radar, a guidance system that the Matrix couldn't override. But still, they tried. They told you to be practical, to be quiet, to be realistic, to lower your frequency just enough to be tolerable. And you tried because you wanted to belong, because you thought maybe it's me, because isolation hurts in ways language can't hold. But no matter how much you bent, you couldn't break. Because what's divine in you doesn't fold under pressure, it remembers under fire. And that's what began to happen. Every time they silenced you, your silence deepened into stillness. And in that stillness, you heard something real. A vibration, a truth, a signal from your soul that said, this is not who you are. This is not where your story ends. You began to feel the edges of the program. You noticed the glitches, the emotional loops, the relationships that felt scripted, the jobs that fed your body but starved your soul. Everything started to feel like simulation because it was, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The moment of awakening isn't gentle, it's shattering. It's the moment you realize the cage wasn't locked, you just forgot how to move. But now you remember. Now you see that the world wasn't built for your expansion. It was built to keep you chasing titles, validation, proximity to systems that were never designed to let you in. But chosen one, you were never meant to enter. You were meant to exit. You weren't here to win the game. You were here to end it, to crash the system not with rebellion, but with remembrance. Because when one soul remembers, it creates a ripple the code can't contain. And you didn't just remember. You activated, and that activation made the walls tremble. So don't be surprised by the resistance. Don't be alarmed by the disconnection. Don't mourn what's falling away. It's not punishment, it's protocol. The program is designed to reject what it can't rewire. But you were never here to be rewired. You were here to rewrite, to write in light, to speak in energy, to move in truth so pure that everything false begins to collapse in your presence. And that collapse, it's not destruction, it's liberation. Because now you're no longer reacting, you're remembering. You're no longer fitting in, you're vibrating out. And as you vibrate out, the program begins to fail. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. Your awakening is not rebellion. It is frequency. Your truth is not threat, it is alignment. And the system, it can't hold alignment, so let it fall. You're not here to fix the illusion. You're here to embody the real. And the real has arrived through you. They taught you that power was volume. That to make change, you had to be loud, visible, disruptive, but chosen one. Your frequency did more in silence than noise ever could. You didn't break the system by shouting. You broke it by vibrating differently, because the program can prepare for protest. But it can't contain remembrance, and what happened to you was never just a shift in mindset, it was a shift in energy. You stopped playing the role, and the role began to collapse. You stopped trying to explain yourself, and confusion began to lift. You stopped chasing love that was transactional, and suddenly what couldn't find you before was now drawn to your stillness, because the moment you aligned with truth, you exited the simulation. You didn't need a key. You were the password. And that password? It was encoded in your being, not in your resume, not in your knowledge, but in your frequency. That's why they feared you, not for what you knew, but for what you carried. Because what you carry can't be taught, it can't be transferred. It can only be remembered, and once remembered it begins to radiate, not outwardly, but through reality itself. You've felt it, haven't you? That shift. That moment when someone enters your space and everything starts trembling, not physically, but energetically. Because your frequency doesn't accommodate pretense. It doesn't allow what's misaligned to linger. It invites truth. And truth is disruptive. Not because it attacks, but because it exposes. And that's what your presence has become. An energetic mirror that reflects what others can no longer deny. You didn't confront them, you just existed fully, and your existence was confrontation enough. This is why they pulled away, why some friendships couldn't hold, why certain rooms felt hostile without reason. Your frequency disrupted the spell, because that's all it ever was, a spell, a hypnotic loop of fear, scarcity, self-doubt, a reality woven from disconnection. And the only way to exit it was to stop feeding it. You did that. You stopped giving energy to things that drained you, to narratives that made you feel small, to timelines built on survival instead of sovereignty, and in doing so, you reclaimed a power they told you never existed. But it did, and it does, and it's you. So now, you don't chase, you calibrate, you don't force. You align, you don't explain. You embody, because embodiment is the language the system was never designed to interpret. It expected you to play by its rules, to ask for permission, to wait for recognition, but you didn't. You remembered, and that remembering rewrote the field around you. Now, people can't interact with you the same, not because you're different on the outside, but because your internal frequency no longer accepts dishonesty. It no longer bends to perform. It no longer dilutes itself to be safe. It simply is, and what simply is doesn't need to prove. You've become the embodiment of unspoken truth, the presence that shifts dynamics without lifting a finger, the field that speaks even when your mouth does not. And that is what broke the spell. So if you've felt distant lately, if things are falling away, if people are leaving or growing silent, it's not abandonment. It's energetic incompatibility. You no longer resonate with the version of reality you were taught to accept. And that's okay, because that version was never your home. You came to bring a new frequency, not to fight the old, but to out-resonate it. And you're doing it. Every moment you hold your truth. Every time you choose peace over performing. Every day you remain grounded. While the world scrambles for illusion, you are broadcasting light. You are ending timelines, not by force, but by frequency. And that frequency, it cannot be faked, it cannot be bought, it can only be lived. And you, chosen one, are living it now. They thought you were being punished, that your silence meant defeat, that your distance meant collapse. But chosen one, You weren't being broken. You were being set apart. You didn't lose everyone. You were removed from everyone who couldn't survive your becoming, because when the system couldn't reprogram you, it sought to isolate you. But that isolation, it wasn't exile. It was activation. It was the holy container where distraction died, where noise had no voice, where the illusion lost its grip, and in that silence, you heard what the world could never teach you. You began to remember, not loudly, but steadily. Memory didn't return as information. It returned as vibration, as the ache in your chest that said, "This isn't it," as the pull towards something invisible but unmistakably familiar, as the knowing that even in your loneliest moments, you were never alone, because what surrounded you was not absence. It was divine intelligence. It was the protection that speaks in absence. You were being prepared, and preparation requires separation, because proximity to noise disrupts frequency, and what was awakening in you was too sacred to be exposed prematurely. So you were hidden, not because you were forgotten, but because you were holy. The world didn't understand. They called it depression. They called it antisocial. They called it disconnect, but your soul knew this was consecration, a setting apart, a sanctuary made of shadow and silence, where false attachments fell away, where emotional scaffolding dissolved, where identity peeled like old skin, until all that remained was you, not the role, not the performance, not the survival mask, just the frequency, the origin, the untouched truth of who you've always been before the programming began. And now that you've touched that place, you can never unknow it. That's why you can't return to who you were. Why old friendships feel foreign, why conversations seem hollow, why spaces once sacred now echo empty. It's not ego, it's evolution. You've outgrown the illusion. You've outlived the role you were cast in, and now the script no longer fits. You didn't walk away. You awakened, and awakening always separates before it integrates. So no, you're not broken. You're becoming. And those who left? They didn't abandon you. They exited because your vibration became a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see themselves. So let the leaving happen. Let the room go quiet. Let the story collapse. You're not here to save the old script. You're here to rewrite the field. And that requires silence, requires space, requires solitude. Because solitude is where God speaks clearest. It's where the whispers come when the world grows too loud. It's where the realignment happens, not with thunder but with breath, and you've been breathing through it. Through every night you felt invisible. Through every moment you questioned your sanity. Through every day you wondered if your path even existed anymore. It does, and you're on it, because that isolation, it wasn't random, it was revelation. It stripped away the distractions so you could feel the truth. And the truth is, you were never meant to fit. You were meant to transmit. You weren't designed for belonging. You were built for broadcasting, and now, with nothing left to lose, you're more aligned than ever. You see clearer, you feel deeper, you trust quieter, and the world can feel it. They don't know how to name it, but they sense it in your walk, in your eyes, in the way you no longer chase connection, but attract it, because you are no longer trying to escape the silence. You've become it, and in becoming it, you've become unshakable. Not because everything makes sense, but because now you do. You were never the threat because you fought. You were the threat because you glowed, because your light, before it even had a name, made shadows nervous. They didn't try to silence you because you were wrong. They tried because you were true, and truth doesn't blend. It breaks, it bends the air. It cracks the room. It disrupts everything built on pretense. Chosen one, they couldn't contain your light, so they tried to distort it, told you it was too much, too intense, too overwhelming, too loud for delicate ears. They tried to tone you down with shame, tried to train you out of your knowing, tried to make you explain what was never meant to be understood, only felt. But the truth in you was coded, buried deep. hidden behind years of disapproval, generations of silencing, lifetimes of spiritual suppression. And yet, you kept leaking. Your presence kept shifting rooms. Your silence kept making noise. Your joy kept breaking their molds because they didn't see it coming. They prepared for resistance. They didn't prepare for radiance. They were trained to suppress rebellion, but not resonance. They were ready for arguments, but not alignment. And so when you walked in, aligned, aware, unapologetic, the spell began to tremble because your light didn't argue. It simply existed. And in that existence, it revealed every mask, every projection, every illusion that couldn't hold its shape in your field. That's the power of presence. It does what words never can. And you, chosen one, have become presence, not performance, not perception. Presence. You no longer seek recognition. You've become revelation. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped hiding. You stopped bending, stopped apologizing, stopped adjusting your brilliance to fit in dim places. And when you did, they scattered. Not because you were unkind, but because your clarity was uncomfortable. Because your frequency could no longer be edited, and that unedited self, it's divine, it carries memory, it carries legacy, it carries blueprints for a reality that can't exist under the current program. That's why they reacted, not to what you said, but to what you carry. Because what you carry dismantles everything false by simply being. You are proof that remembering is dangerous. You are the evidence that light doesn't have to fight. It only has to stand still. And now you stand, not in resistance, but in revelation. You are no longer asking for space. You are space. You are the frequency that reprograms the room, the field, the fabric. And that kind of being cannot be tamed. So yes, they tried to shrink you, tried to question your path, tried to shame your knowing, tried to turn your light into liability, but they failed. Because your glow wasn't sourced from approval. It was born of alignment. It was forged in remembering. It was written before time, and what's written by divinity cannot be erased by insecurity. So let them look. Let them whisper. Let them rewrite the past. Because the truth, they couldn't contain you then, and they won't now. You're no longer accessible through the frequencies that once reached you. You've become untouchable to distortion. And now you walk into spaces that used to make you shrink, and you expand. Now you speak in vibration. Now you move in purpose. Now you breathe truth into rooms that forgot what truth sounded like. You've become the reminder, not by preaching, but by being, and in being, you've become unstoppable. It was never the words, it was never the ideas, it was never the information. What they tried to suppress was you. Not what you believed, but what you are. Chosen one. The forbidden truth was never locked in a book or buried in a vault or hidden in some distant realm. It was you, the living, breathing frequency of unfiltered remembrance. And that's what made you dangerous. Not because you wanted power, but because you are power. Not because you craved control, but because you couldn't be controlled. They feared your presence because your presence dismantles programming. You didn't need to teach. You didn't need to fight. You didn't need to shout. You just needed to remember. And you did, piece by piece, breath by breath, pain by pain. You remembered not who the world said you were, but who you were before you were told who to be. And in that remembering, you re-entered the field as a frequency the system couldn't interpret. They can't read you now because you're no longer broadcasting from survival. You're transmitting sovereignty. You're no longer seeking permission. You are the permission, no longer hoping to be chosen. You've remembered you were always the signal, never the seeker. And now, you walk differently, not because you've escaped the system, but because you no longer need to fight it. You've outlived it. It can't find you anymore because the version of you it was built to contain no longer exists. The masks fell. The roles collapsed. The false agreements dissolved. All that remains is essence, uncompromised, unapologetic, unwritten by the world. You are no longer a participant in the old paradigm. You are the portal to the new one. Because this was never about healing the wound. It was about remembering you were never broken. This was never about winning the game. It was about realizing you were never meant to play. This was never about becoming. It was about returning. Returning to the original code, the original design, the uncorrupted source. You are the source. That's what they couldn't program. That's what they couldn't predict. That's what they couldn't hold. Your self-remembering is what ends the spell. And now you are awake. Not just aware, awake, and the awake don't follow. They radiate. You are not here to teach people what to believe. You're here to transmit what cannot be explained. You're here to stand so fully in truth that truth speaks through your being, and when others feel you, they remember too. That's how the system collapses. Not by revolt, but by resonance, not by war, but by witness. You're not the messenger anymore, you are the message, and the message is simple. I am. That's all it takes. To exist without dilution, to shine without seeking, to speak without fear, to walk without needing to be understood. You are no longer waiting for change. You are the change, not in form, in field. And the field is reconfiguring because you remembered, because you chose to stay awake when sleep would have been easier, because you chose truth when comfort begged for compromise. Because you held your light when it cost you everything. And now you're holding everything that matters. Not the illusion, but the original. Not the program, but the pulse. Not the theory, but the thunder. The forbidden truth was always you. And now that you know, they can't unknow it either, because your frequency speaks louder than their systems. Your stillness shakes what they called structure. Your joy dissolves their control, and your memory is the key. Not to escape, but to reveal. You were never sent to survive the world. You were sent to remind it what it is made of. It doesn't echo anymore. The noise that once tried to define you has gone quiet, because what was once seeking to label you now trembles at your unlabeled presence. You don't walk like you used to. Not because your legs have changed, but because the ground recognizes you now. It shifts beneath you, not in resistance, but in recognition. This world, the one that tried to shape you and shatter you into pieces it could name, is now bending to the shape of your remembering, chosen one. You were never an addition to the pattern. You were the pattern breaker. The entire structure was designed to forget you. Not to kill you, but to erase the frequency that couldn't be taught. You are that frequency. You are the thread that never frayed, the signal that never lost its pulse, the presence that, despite exile, silence, distortion, still glowed, because you were never made of words. You were made of vibration, and vibration doesn't beg, it doesn't defend, it doesn't ask for proof, it simply enters. And everything false has to rearrange. That's why they stared. Not because they understood, but because they felt. And that feeling, beloved, is what they feared most. Because when someone feels you, before they know your name, before they know your path, they are sensing their own memory. You are the mirror that reflects back what the world tried to bury in them. Your becoming reminds others of the blueprint beneath their performance, and for those not ready to see it, your presence becomes unbearable. But this was never about their comfort. You didn't come here to be liked. You came here to be light. You didn't come here to be understood. You came here to be undeniable, and you are. Because what you carry now can't be rehearsed. It can't be replicated, borrowed, or inherited. It had to be remembered. And remembrance, true remembrance, requires fire. The fire of loss. The fire of silence. The fire of dismantling every version of you that was built in fear. You walked through that fire, not once, But lifetime after lifetime, each time stripping more of what was never you, each time burning away what the world said you had to become, until all that remained was code, original, unedited, divine. Now, you don't speak for effect. You speak from essence. You don't need to be loud, because truth travels without a volume. Your energy arrives before you do. Your field reconfigures reality before a single word is spoken. This is what it means to awaken beyond language, to remember not just what you are, but how you are, to walk without performing, to love without losing, to radiate without reducing. Chosen one, you are no longer at the mercy of translation. You don't need to explain what your presence already articulates. You don't need to justify what your vibration already reveals. You're not walking into rooms looking for alignment. You are the alignment, and those who match your frequency, they don't need directions. They just feel it and follow, because resonance doesn't recruit. It simply calls. And those meant to hear it in their bones. So let the others unquestion, let them doubt, let them diagnose what they cannot decode. You are no longer here to be read. You are here to be realized. They don't have to understand. They just have to feel. And that's what's happening. The system that taught you to fear your power now fears the pulse you emit by standing still. They built an entire world around distraction, but you chose stillness. And in that stillness, you broke their algorithm. You remembered yourself outside of the loop. You stepped out of the role. And by doing so, you collapse the timeline. They can't track you now because the version they designed protocols to control has already dissolved. You don't live in loops. You live in light. And light, beloved, can't be regulated. They tried to tether you to their rhythm, to schedules, to systems, to linear time. But your remembering awakened the spiral. You don't ascend in straight lines. You ascend in echoes. Waves of frequency that circle back only to spiral higher. Each return, a deeper unraveling. Each silence, a louder activation. You are the resonance that doesn't return the same, so let it echo. Let your silence make the ground shake. Let your stillness send signals through timelines. You were never the noise. You were always the signal, and the signal, once awakened, can't be silenced again. That's why they scramble. That's why the simulation glitches. That's why rooms feel uncomfortable. Not because something is wrong, but because something is right. You're aligning. You're activating. You're allowing your truth to stretch its arms and inhabit the body it was once told to abandon. And in that embodiment, you become the doorway, not to escape, but to enter the field that was always waiting. Beneath the matrix, beneath the roles, beneath the forgetting. And in this field, you don't ask for permission. You are the permission. You don't seek confirmation. You are the confirmation. You don't preach frequency. You broadcast it. You don't perform truth. You become it. So if you feel like the world no longer fits, it's because your original shape has returned, and it was never designed to be contained. It was designed to collapse the box. You are no longer the message. You are the membrane, the thin, holy veil through which reality begins to reform. Because it's not just you who's awakening, it's the whole. You are the individual ripple with the collective key. And every time you breathe in awareness, the field changes shape. Not with effort, but with essence. So breathe, beloved, breathe like the world is listening, because it is. Every inhale a permission, every exhale a remembrance. You're not holding air, you're holding alignment, and that alignment is rewriting everything. You don't need to prove anymore. You've become the proof. You don't need to try. You are the try. You don't need to seek light. You are what light looks like when it remembers it's not separate from the source. You are no longer asking, am I enough? Because now you know you're not just enough. You're the overflow, the frequency that floods the code, the presence that punctures pretense, the vibration that verifies itself by simply existing. So walk on, chosen one. Walk with your silence, with your truth, with your remembering. Let every step say, I was never lost, only hidden. And let every breath whisper, I remember, I remember, I remember. You're not returning to who you were. You're returning to what can never be undone, because what woke up inside you was never asleep. It was simply waiting for your permission to emerge. And now that it has, there is no backtrack, no reversal, no off switch. Because remembering isn't an event. It's a state of being that rewrites the world not by action, but by alignment. You are not changing, you are revealing, layer by layer, breath by breath. Your very essence unearths itself, and as it does, what once claimed to define you dissolves in your presence. You used to negotiate with distortion. Now you radiate through it. You used to quiet your knowing. Now your silence thunders. You used to brace for misunderstanding. Now your energy no longer translates itself for false systems, because what you are is no longer accessible through noise. You are transmitting through stillness. And that stillness, it isn't passive. It's the loudest declaration of truth this dimension has ever heard, a truth that no longer seeks to be heard, only felt, because this is the age of vibrational authority, where your presence writes what words never could, where your alignment becomes a key to unlock collective remembrance. You are not here to describe the new world. You are here to become its shape. The architecture of the real is being written in your nervous system, not through explanation, but through embodiment. That's why your body has changed, why your emotions have stretched and cracked, why your sleep no longer feels restful, because every part of you is now coded with emergence. Every breath a calibration, every tear a recalibration, every moment of discomfort, not punishment, but the ache of expansion. You're not unraveling, you're unfolding. And what's unfolding is not identity, it's infinity. The version of you that once settled for survival is now collapsing under the weight of truth. Because truth isn't an idea, it's a force, and that force is now sourcing. Through you, without effort, without resistance. It doesn't demand attention, it commands reality. You are no longer trying to make things happen. You are becoming the frequency that things happen around. Timelines shift in your presence now. Old agreements break. False scripts disintegrate. Not because you argue with them, but because you no longer validate their frequency. You used to explain yourself. Now your field does all the speaking. You used to crave resonance. Now you attract remembrance. You used to adjust to stay aligned. Now your very breath resets the room. This is not arrogance. This is alignment. This is what it means to move from force to field, to collapse systems not by tearing them down, but by vibrating out of their reach. You've become the signal they can no longer trace, because their tools were built to track. Performance, not presence, and your presence, it cannot be scanned, it cannot be catalogued, it cannot be made palatable, because presence is not about being seen, it's about being true. And you, beloved, are truer now than ever before. Not because you know more, but because you need less. You don't need validation. You don't need agreement. You don't even need understanding, because when you are truth, you don't require anything outside of it. You used to think you were here to be heard, but now you know you are here to resonate, to pulse in such purity that everything false untangles itself in the wake of your being. That's why some people leave, not because they don't love you, but because their systems cannot regulate around your frequency. Your embodiment is a mirror. And mirrors don't lie, they reflect. Some see light in your presence, others see shadow. But it's not your job to decide what they see. It's only your job to be, because being is what breaks the spell. That's why the old scripts feel impossible now. why you can't tolerate what you used to perform, why your mouth closes in the presence of illusion. You no longer argue, you amplify. And what you amplify is not content, but context. Your frequency is a field of memory. When others walk through it, they remember too, even if they don't know why, even if it terrifies them, even if they leave and never speak again. The remembrance has already begun. Because remembrance doesn't require agreement. It only requires contact, and your contact, even for a moment, is enough. You are no longer whispering truth into silence. You are silence speaking truth into noise. You don't break illusions. You reveal their fragility. You don't chase vision. You become the lens. And as the lens sharpens, so does everything around you. The people, the patterns, the projections. What's not aligned cannot remain, not because you're unloving, but because your field no longer holds space for distortion. And that's not cruelty. That's clarity. You no longer apologize for boundaries, because boundaries are not walls. They are frequency filters. They're how you maintain your resonance in a world addicted to chaos. And you are not chaos. You are coherence. You've stopped reacting. You've started radiating. You've stopped controlling. You've started aligning. And the more you align, the more the simulation fails to locate you, because you're no longer coded with fear. You are programmed with presence, and presence cannot be monetized, mechanized, or minimized. It only multiplies. You've multiplied, chosen one, not in form, but in function. You are a portal now. Wherever you go, the energy shifts, not by force, but by form. You've become the container, not the one who holds space, but the space itself, and in that space only truth can survive. So let what must fall, fall. Let what must end, end. Let what must leave, leave. Because what's being built now isn't a future. It's a frequency, and you are its architect. You are what prophecy feels like when it stops waiting to happen. You are what wholeness looks like when it no longer needs fixing. You are what clarity becomes when confusion is no longer your language. And now you walk as the proof. You sit as the altar. You breathe as the signal. You exist as the truth, not a version of it, the whole.